What makes good writing? What makes for good writing? And how can you strengthen your writing so that your content and what you're trying to say does not get lost because of your writing mechanics? Today we're going to talk about flow, and we're going to talk about clarity and word choice. I was an English major at Princeton. I absolutely loved my time being an English major, but I can tell you that when I first became an English major, I first decided to become an English major, I was a little concerned that I wouldn't have what it takes to write effectively, because while I felt pretty confident in my writing skills, there were a lot of little mechanics that were very troubling and concerning to me. Namely, commas. I did not know how to use commas. I remember very clearly my junior year advisor telling me, quite frankly, that I did not know how to use commas. I think I had an avoidance technique. I was like, I don't know how to use them, so I'm not going to. That was not the right answer. There's so many things that can come with strong writing, with knowing how to use punctuation effectively, with knowing how to weave together intricate sentences, knowing how to look at the flow and pacing of your writing, that I think it's so important. Even though this might not be the most exciting topic to anyone, no one really wakes up and they're like, I'm going to talk about commas today. It is important, because admissions are only spending probably about 15 or 20 minutes on your application materials, maybe 25. And they're trying to understand who you are. And you are trying to convey your impact, all of the reasons why you're going to law school, what you've been doing, who you are. But all of that can get lost if they are stuck on your writing style. So I know when I receive a piece of writing, whether that's to edit or to review, and that's our job, right? Is to help you, teach you the different grammatical mechanisms, teach you how to elevate your writing. And I really like to use the word teach. It's not just I'm going to give you comments and it's only going to be for this paper, but you're going to need to write in everything that you do. You're going to need to write in your time as a lawyer. You're going to need to write in law school. Every first year student takes first year legal research and writing. You're going to need to write when you are clerking, if you choose to clerk, if you're a lawyer at a firm, if you're writing a memo, if you're writing a brief to a judge. I clerked for a judge, and I can tell you that there was a big difference when we received maybe 2 different memos or 2 different motions from opposing counsel, and one counsel's motion was written really well with great sections and great flow and great clarity and yes, great comma usage, and maybe the other attorney just didn't really write that well. It was a little sloppy. Maybe, it was hard to understand. And it's not just about being pretentious or a grammar snob, because I think sometimes it gets a bad rep, but sometimes it literally is about ease and flow. And when we talk about personal statements and diversity statements, when we talk about narrative writing and we talk about making an impact on admissions, you want the reader to be emotionally connected to your writing, which means that you want them to read it with ease. I love when I get a personal statement and immediately I'm like, this is good writing. And I'm with them. And now I'm 100% focused on the content. I'm 100% focused on who this person is and their emotions and the feelings, and I'm feeling what they want me to feel, and it's great. And I have a positive response. But sometimes if I get a personal statement and maybe there's no paragraphs, it's choppy, I find myself reading the same sentence 3 different times because I'm like, what are they saying? I don't really get it. I'm really not as focused on what you're saying because I'm struggling to understand it. And so at the end, my emotions are not the same. At the end, I'm not maybe as excited about you as an applicant as I might be with an applicant that had a strong, well-written essay. There are so many things that we have to work on and that go into law school applications, right? There's your LSAT score, there's your GPA, there's your letters of recommendation, there's your resume, there might be an addenda, and then there's your writing. And my goal is so that it's all about the content. I don't want things that are as silly, but sometimes very frustrating as commas and semicolons and em dashes and word choice and diction and density and flow. Like, I don't want that to get in the way. There are so many things that you've overcome to get to the place where you're applying to law school. Like, let's not make that the stumbling block. The place where someone feels like, you know what, I don't know, their writing style was just not that good. I was kind of on the fence about them anyways. Deny. right? Because here's the thing, if you're an applicant that is applying, especially if you're applying below the medians and maybe they're a little bit on the fence, you can help them, help yourself, right? By having strong, beautiful, evocative piece of writing. If your writing style, however, is also not strong and maybe your grades aren't that strong and your LSAT score isn't that strong, they're not going to come away thinking, wow, what a strong applicant. It's sort of confirming maybe what your hard scores are already saying. So I want us to really focus on doing what we can to overcome things that maybe we cannot control. And, your GPA is sort of what it is at this point. Your LSAT score at this point in December is, there's a January LSAT. But we are kind of where we are. But what you absolutely can control is your writing and your flow and your style. So let's talk about flow, because I think flow is definitely one of those things that we're always correcting with students with their writing. This is going to be part 1 of probably a 2 or 3-part video, because I think it's so important that we do talk about writing style and elevating your writing style and your diction. So when we talk about flow, sometimes students write things and the writing is very choppy. And if you're thinking about kind of flow as, okay, I'm reading through it and I'm taking a trip, sometimes you go on a trip and you're like, wow, we're here already? That's how you want your essay to flow. Like, you want to be like, wow, we're here already. You don't want it to be like, oh my God, are we there yet? How much more of this essay do I have to, oh my God, a whole nother page left. Ugh, okay. Right? And that when you're choppy and the sentences are short and disjoint, maybe they don't really have transitions, that's how it feels like. It feels like a long trip that you're trying to figure out how much longer you have to go. There are some easy things that we can do to work on this. The first piece of advice I'm going to give is read your essay out loud, preferably to somebody, because I remember getting the advice, read your essay out loud to yourself, and I read it out loud to myself, sort of. I kind of rushed through it. I wasn't really listening. It's when we read our essay out loud to someone else that we're like, no wait, that's an awkward sentence. You're right, this is kind of awkward for me to read. You're not with me. And they're probably going to be like, no, I'm not with you, right? So read your essay out loud to someone else. When you have thoughts that might be related and they're short sentences, consider joining them with a semicolon. All right, so now we're going to get a little bit in the weeds here. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about commas, semicolons, and em dashes, and parentheses. I am not a huge fan of parentheses in this kind of writing. I think an em dash, as opposed to a parentheses, is probably a little bit more elegant on the page. It just looks a little nicer. And I think it's like, oh, good use of em dash, right? We take the points where we can get them. So if you're going to set something aside, like in a positive, you can set it aside with commas. You can also set it aside with em dashes. And I think a good use of em dashes are often underutilized. And if you're like, what the heck is an em dash? An em dash is the longer dash. So sometimes I see people in their personal statements use the tiny dash. That's not it. You want the longer em dash, and you want to look at your spacing and punctuation when you use an em dash. But sometimes if you're trying to set something aside, like, oh, here's a little note. I'm talking, oh yes, we're going to the store. That store was just rebuilt 2 years ago. And at the store, right, that's a little bit of an aside. We're going to the store. That store was just rebuilt 2 years ago. It's not really important to the main point, but I'm going to tell you a little bit anyways. We can set it aside with an em dash. Where you might have put a parentheses, you can use an em dash. All right, so you may have a lot of independent clauses, if you will, like short little sentences that you can connect with a semicolon. You do not use a comma to connect two independent clauses without kind of like a conjunction, like an and or a but or a for, right? If they're just two independent clauses, you do not use a comma to connect them. That is called a comma splice. If you have two independent clauses that are related to each other, Johnny and I walked to the store. The store was 5 miles from our house. You could have Johnny and I walked to the store, period. The store was 5 miles from our house, period. Very stop and go, boop, 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 boop. Not very flowing. Johnny and I walked to the store, semicolon. The store was 5 miles from our house. Those are two independent clauses. It connects it with a little bit more flow. If you wanted to use a comma with two independent clauses, there would have to be like a comma and, right? Or comma but. There's a lot of rules in terms of when you use commas with and but, and so you want to look at that. I'm a big fan of semicolon it out, right? You don't want to overuse semicolons. You don't want to use a semicolon where you should have used a comma. So you cannot use a semicolon to connect an independent and a dependent clause. For example, Johnny and I went to the store. That was far away. That was far away. It's not really an independent clause, so you're not going to join them by a semicolon. This is very technical, I know, and you're like, Sydney, this is so boring. But this is so important. I'm going to nerd out with you just a little bit. You might be like, nobody cares. Like, I'm not going to not get into law school because I used a comma instead of a semicolon, or a period instead of a semicolon, or a dash where it should have been a comma. You're like, nobody cares. But actually people do care, and people that read writing a lot care. And admissions readers read writing a lot, right? And it's a breath of fresh air when you know how to do these things. And sure, if you have one sentence where you're not using it correctly, is anyone going to hold it against you? No. But if I have to read 2 pages of, wow, this is really choppy, wow, this doesn't flow, wow, we could have used semicolons, wow, they don't know how to use a comma, 2 pages of that thought running through my head actually could make a difference. The other thing is, and I don't even read nearly as many essays as admissions officers, it's so rare that people are good writers. It's sad. It's sad. We are in a sad place in this country with writing, but it's so rare that people are good writers that when I get an essay that is written well, it makes me notice that candidate more. I know people often think about, how do I stand out in my applications? They're reading thousands and thousands and thousands of applications. How do I stand out? Write a well-written essay. Have a beautiful narrative opening scene. Use semicolons and em dashes appropriately. Have flow in your writing. Because I can tell you, like, if it makes a difference to me when I first review someone's personal statement and it's already written well, oh my goodness, it's like, who is this person? Let me read it a little bit more carefully. Maybe you don't have the best scores. Maybe you don't have the best GPA. This is what you can do. You can write a beautiful piece of writing. You can be that bright light in what is probably a dungeon of poorly written personal statements, and you can make their day. Be like a happy moment. I read this beautiful essay today, and it's like lovely, and I love that. And who is this person again that wrote that beautiful, oh, that person. Oh, let's look at her a little closer, right? Like, you can use this to your advantage. It's so simple. Some more things about flow. You want to have cadence and varied rhythm. So all of your sentences shouldn't be short, but all of your sentences shouldn't be long. You want to have that variety, a mix of short sentences and long sentence purposefully. So you're telling a story. Your personal statement is a narrative piece of writing. Not that the whole thing is in storytelling mode, but you are still conveying a story. So one of the things actually is that you want to remember just that. Sometimes students, they write their personal statement either like an academic essay, or they write their personal statement maybe not like really like a letter, but you're just kind of telling me things, or you're oversharing. I get a lot of in the first paragraph, so I really want to go into this kind of law because of this, and this, which might sound like a thesis statement, but I think in terms of narrative arc, which is really important, like you can actually lead into with your stories what area of law you might want to go into. I get people that tell me things like, well, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and it's really hard to know what I wanted to do, and I wasn't really that good of a student, but then I found this, and then I decided, like, who are you writing for and how are you writing? Are you telling me a good story? Because it's not a good story, right? Like, you want to remember purpose, and you want to remember who you're writing for and your audience and how you are crafting this piece of writing. I cannot stress enough, this is a writing sample. This is a crafted piece of writing that should feel beautiful and should feel like I really see how the different pieces of my personal statement came together, and I'm telling this complete package. It's like a project. You want it to be a good project. And some of you are not writing that. Some of you are just writing and you're not really thinking about, well, how does the beginning go to the middle? How does the middle go to the end? How do these tie together? Do I have narrative weaving? Like, all those things go into flow. And so when you're thinking about cadence and varied sentence structure, you actually want to be thinking about, am I going to emphasize this point? Maybe I'm going to emphasize this point. To emphasize it, I am going to use a shorter sentence, right? I have some really lovely flowing sentences, but now I want to get the reader's attention with a shorter sentence. Or maybe you might be thinking, okay, how am I going to connect these two maybe complex thoughts together? And so you just want to be intentional about the speed and the rhythm, and a lot of that comes from reading your essay out loud to other people. Because even in the way that I'm talking to you right now, there are times when I am going, and then I might stop and be like, this is really important. Pause, right? You can bring in pauses with your punctuation. You want to make sure that as you are going and as you are telling the story, there is a cadence to your rhythm that seems like, okay, this is how I would speak it. If you find yourself speaking with a different cadence when you read your paper out loud than what's actually printed, the reader will not read it like you. I don't know how many of you play music. I'm a pianist. I grew up reading music, and I can't sing at all. God did not bless me with that gift. But when I'm always so fascinated because piano music, it tells you how to play, right? Slow down, speed up, crescendo, all those things. But if you sometimes even look at music for choirs, there might be even places where it indicates breath or change in tempo and those sort of things. And they do that so that someone else who is not the composer will be able to play or sing as the composer intended. So I want you to think about your personal statement like a piece of music, like sheet music, right? You want them to be able to read it and get from it as you intended. So another exercise you could do is actually give your personal statement to someone else to read out loud. A scary thought sometimes, but just give it to them and listen to how they read it out loud. And if you're like, wait, that's not how that's supposed to sound, then I want you to look at your punctuation. I want you to look at your sentence structure. I want you to look at the variation and see, well, what did I want it to sound like? What am I trying to convey that's not actually written on this piece of paper? I want to talk a little bit about word choice and diction as well. I kind of hinted at it a little bit. You want to have a little bit of elevated tone, seriousness of purpose, understanding audience when you're writing. You're not writing like you're talking to your friend or you're texting someone or your younger sibling, or even your mom. You're writing for a very specific audience, and you want to make sure that you have that elevated writing style, but you don't want to be too dense. And sometimes, quite often, people feel like, oh my God, I'm writing to law school. I need to use every big word that I've ever learned in my entire life and string them all together and pack them in to these super dense sentences that make me sound so smart. And sometimes we will take 10 words. Instead of the 2 words we should have used, we'll take 10 different words, right? Wordiness is an issue. So I often go through and I cross out extra words. And sometimes they're things like you're adding extra haves, or ofs, or about how, or all of these filler words that I don't think you need. And you probably wouldn't even say it like that, but you feel like you need to sound a certain way. And so you're throwing in all of these words. It just makes your writing confusing. And again, as I'm reading it, I'm now reading the same sentence 2 or 3 times, and I'm like, what is she trying to say? What did he mean by this? I don't get it, right? This is actually especially important for those of you who are going into IP law or coming from a STEM or science background or a really complex background. Sometimes you get really in the weeds of the thing that you're trying to do or you're trying to study. And it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it doesn't mean that you can't talk about those things, but you have to remember, your audience does not know. You might have a biophysics degree, and that's why you're going into AP law. You can tell from the way that I said that, I have no idea what that means. I was an English major, and you have to understand that admissions people, they don't know everything, right? They're not walking encyclopedias. They only know what they know. And if you don't explain a concept or you use super dense language or you get really in the weeds, they're going to be confused. You don't want to confuse them because, again, you want them to emotionally connect to your writing. You want them to feel like, okay, this is something that I understand. I understand why she wants to go to law school. Maybe I don't fully, they don't have to fully understand everything. You don't need to over-explain, but they just need to not be confused, right? Enough that they're not not confused is really the goal here. I read essays all the time about things that I don't understand, but I can kind of follow it if it's explained in a way that makes sense. So you don't want to have too casual language, but you also don't want to be too dense. You also want to make sure that it's authentic to you. So ask yourself as you're putting the words into your personal statement, like, have I ever used this word before? Is this true to who I am academically? And if the answer is no, then don't use it. You don't need large or fancy language to get into law school. The language that you have is completely fine. It shouldn't be casual, like, hey, what are you doing? I don't know. I didn't know what I was doing in my life. And I was like, yo, like, let me think about this. Like, you don't need to write like that, right? But all of you can write in a professional manner, but it doesn't have to be this highbrow, Ivy Tower academic writing. This is my dissertation for my PhD program writing either. It just needs to be clear and professional and ideally emotive at some points as well. And I think when we have language that's too dense, then we miss the ability to convey emotion through our writing because we're so focused on being academic. As I continue to mention, your personal statement is a narrative piece of writing. It's a story, it's a journey that you're taking admissions on, and that journey should include some kind of emotion. Happy, sad, angry, confused. I should go through some emotion. Any emotion, some emotion during your personal statement. Oftentimes, I get a lot of personal statements that are also devoid of emotion in a way that doesn't actually make me feel like you're passionate about what you're talking about. And it seems also too dry and too boring. If I'm going to be honest, a boring personal statement's not great. And you can avoid all of those things. Like I said, this is going to be one of probably a 3-part video. I wanted to really talk about flow and word choice and kind of talk through some of those mechanics, really looking at how do we use commas, how are we using semicolons, how are we using em dashes. Remember, commas do not join two independent clauses, semicolons join two independent clauses. If you're using however with two independent clauses, it's usually semicolon, however, comma. There are a lot of mechanics and rules there, but they're actually very learnable. It takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of memorization, but they're learnable and they're worth learning. So I would take some time. The things that you should walk away from today, right? You're going to read your personal statement out loud. You're going to give your personal statement to someone else to read out loud to you to make sure that it sounds the way that you thought it would sound, that you have written your sheet music in a way that someone else can sing it, if you will. You're going to look at the difference between commas and semicolons, the difference between commas, semicolons, and em dashes, and make sure that you're using independent and dependent clauses correctly, and vary your sentences. Some short sentences, some long sentences. Don't have them all be short and choppy. Don't have them all be long and convoluted. You're going to look at your word choice, right? We're going to elevate it up from casual speak, but we're going to bring it down from that ivory tower that's so dense and dry. We're going to add emotion into the writing. We're going to start with a narrative story. We're going to open up in the moment. We're going to make sure that there is an emotive presence in our writing, whether that's happy, sad, angry, confused, distraught, whatever it is. We're going to make sure that there's some sort of emotion in our writing as well. And we're going to be that car ride that's like, wow, I can't believe we're at the end, and not, oh my God, when are we going to get there, right? We're going to make sure that there's movement in our writing, movement in our transitions, right? That includes transitions between paragraphs. You're going to have paragraphs and appropriate breaks. You're not going to give me just one wall of text. And we're going to really try to make sure that we are elevating our writing style, not adding extra words that we don't need, avoiding some of that passive voice, and really making sure that the mechanics of our writing are not the thing that's distracting readers from the content of our writing. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. We do have a free guide on writing your personal statement. Check that out on our website. There's also lots of free grammar things out there. Of course, there's things like Grammarly. There's also just really great free resources from different colleges and universities if you're trying to find a specific grammar skill to learn. Grammar can be really intimidating. I was really intimidated by it, and I was an English major. I felt like, oh my God, I just don't know this. It's just too hard. It's just too confusing. I'm just gonna hope no one catches it. But I encourage you to, this is your invitation to learn to love grammar, to learn to love to write, because it is a skill that you are going to need at every single part in this career. You can't get away from this. So I invite you to embrace this and go through the awkwardness of, I struggle with commas, and that's okay. right? There's no shame in it, there's no judge in it, but you do owe it to yourself to learn some of these mechanics rules so that your writing can be as beautiful as you are and your content can really shine, because that's really what we're here to do. So guys, like I said, as a reminder, we have a free guide on our website, Essential Guide to Applying to Law School. We also have a free guide on your personal statement. Our Mastering Your Personal and Diversity Statement course is only $19. You have examples there about tone and writing style and diction, and so I would definitely go through all of those. But there's so many free resources on grammar. We're always here and here for you, and you can submit questions to us at bit.ly/breakintolawschool. I can't wait to see you writing. I wish you peace and blessings in this application season and this holiday season, and I will see you soon.